The days are longer, the calendar is filling up, and I want to feel as good as this beautiful summer weather. That's why I've been loving Groons. It's one daily pack of gummies that covers my greens, vitamins, and minerals, and even has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, so I don't need to juggle a complicated wellness routine on top of everything else. They taste amazing. They're easy to toss in my bag on the go. Plus, they're vegan, gluten-free, and HSA, FSA eligible for reimbursement. Save up to 52% off with promo code podcast at gruns.co. That's code podcast at gruns.co.
It's the Go Gopher Podcast with Mike Grimm, episode number 79. I am Mike Grimm, voice of the Golden Gophers, and welcome back to the podcast. Believe it or not, the Golden Gopher football team opens the regular season now in less than 6 weeks. That means the start of fall camp is just around the corner, as is the annual Big Ten Football Media Day, which is next week in Indianapolis. It's my pleasure to welcome back to our podcast Scott Dochterman, who writes about the Big Ten and college football for The Athletic. We'll find out what he's looking forward to the most about next week's Media Days in Indy. We'll preview the Big Ten West Chase. We'll tackle some general issues regarding the Big Ten. And because Scott is based in Iowa, we'll get a bit of an outsider perspective on Gopher football, which is always worthwhile and healthy, as well as interesting. Scott has his finger on the pulse of the Big Ten, and I know you'll enjoy our preseason football podcast. Our Go Gopher podcast is presented by alumni-owned Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're a business founder planning to exit your business, start by contacting Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. Sunbelt serves more businesses up to $5 million in revenue than anyone, and True North M&A serves companies with revenues up to $150 million. Get a confidential, no-cost, no-obligation business valuation started today. Make the most of your life's work. Visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com today. No one is better than Brian Slipka and his entire team at True North, servant leadership at its finest. We're honored to be able to talk about them and share the company's story. We're also honored to be affiliated with Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union on the Go Gopher podcast. Affinity Plus is your local credit union throughout the state of Minnesota. Find out more at affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, one of the very best supporters of the Gophers and your local credit union. I couldn't be happier to break the news as well. They've signed on as a major sponsor of our podcast for another season. It's been a great partnership. Our podcast is also sponsored by State Farm agent Tony Hoagland at ChamplinInsurance.com. And stick around over the next few weeks. We have a couple of more exciting sponsorship announcements to make. We're podcasting episode 79 from the Aquarius Home Services studio. We invite you to subscribe to the Go Gopher podcast. It's free to do so. You can also go back and listen to the Go Gopher podcast from previous weeks. For example, last week, we spoke with Gopher sports psychologist Dr. Carly Anderson on how the mind is maybe the most valuable asset athletes have when it comes to hitting peak performance. Go back and have a listen. It's free to listen to any of our Go Gopher podcast. This week, it's episode 79, and we're talking Big Ten football with Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. Scott Dochterman joins me next.
I'm Clay Geary, walk-on turned scholarship wide receiver for Gopher football.
And I'm Ben Utek, U of M alumni, Super Bowl champion, and Tony Dungy Uncommon Award winner.
We understand championship culture, which is why we're part of the True North family of companies.
True North invests in only elite teams, like the champion team at Sunbelt Business Advisors, Minnesota's largest seller of companies. To learn more about True North and our diverse family of independently owned companies, visit TrueNorthEquityPartners.com.
Hi, Gopher fans. Switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on lights, we switch TV channels, we switch on the TV. And with the new transfer portal, some college students even switch colleges, which can seem crazy to us diehard fans. But what's not crazy is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, my agency can switch you over so we can start saving today. My team is ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood and show you it is, in fact, easy to switch and save. When you want the real deal, check us out at ChamplinInsurance.com. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
It's episode number 79, the Go Gopher podcast, and it's our pleasure to welcome back to our podcast Scott Dochterman, who is with The Athletic, covers college football, college basketball, the Iowa Hawkeyes, and the Big Ten Conference for The Athletic. And I say welcome back because, Scott, this is your second appearance on our podcast. We're over Zoom today, but you were in studio with us, I guess it was about a year ago this time, because you have some Minneapolis connections. I don't know if your son and daughter still are up here, but you were in town, and I said, hey, let's do a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun. My daughter graduated from MCAD, only a couple of months ago in May, and my son had graduated 2 years ago. So they were living together, and since have relocated home, so we don't have to pay for two living spaces in just one. But I very much enjoyed our time in Minneapolis. I mean, 6 years, because my son's 2 years older, so both of them went up there. So I could drive the Avenue of the Saints in my sleep and probably have a few times.
Yeah, the old, I always joke that the Floyd, Iowa truck stop used to be a real kind of a decent one, and then they put a fancier one next to it. I still feel sorry for the decent one, so I usually stop there. But what a fitting stop if you're a Hawkeye or a Gopher. Floyd, Iowa, of course, for those two states that play for Floyd of Rosedale.
Yeah, and it's pretty close to halfway too. So, it's funny. I think there's been a handful of times that even as a driver, I've tried to slow down and take a picture of it. And all right, Floyd, fight for Floyd. So, what a perfect spot. And now that area has actually been kind of torn up, so it's kind of a pain in the butt. But so you can slow down a little bit more easily, I suppose. Yeah, this time around.
Yeah, I just drove it last week. I was down in my hometown of Manchester, Iowa, the Delaware County Fair Week. I usually go back, and so it's really torn up, that particular area, and I wonder, once it's done, it'll be a faster fly through Floyd, I suppose, once the construction's done. But that was interesting to see. One whole side of that road is gone, and they're I'm assuming building new stuff there. But anyway, that's what it is in Iowa and Minnesota in the summer, is road construction season, because the time is limited as to when you can work on the roads. Speaking of travel and the roads, you and I will both be in Indianapolis, Indiana next week, Big Ten football media days. And we say media days. Now it used to be media day, but with 14 teams and more players, it seems, and more storylines, that thing has expanded into a couple of days now. They've eliminated the luncheon, which it used to happen in Chicago. And with the pandemic, things got switched to Indianapolis. We thought it might be for 1 year, but I think the setting has been great at Lucas Oil Stadium, and it allows for a little more space than some of those hotels in Chicago, because they bounced around to some varying hotels. That said, I do miss some of the intimacy of the old days, Scott, in terms of the media days. And I know our listeners probably don't care about what we get as media people, but now it's a little more sterile, I guess, because it's usually just a podium setting for all the players, where it used to be you could sneak in and get some one-on-one time with athletes, with interviews, and kind of create your own individualized stories. And that's really been tougher now with the way the format is. And I don't think they can do it any differently, but it's just changed, I think, over the years from when you and I first started going to cover those things.
Yeah, old grizzled dudes like ourselves, we long for those days. And, I miss Chicago because first of all, it's a couple hours closer, but it always had a kickoff vibe. It is kind of the capital of the Midwest, and you could run into people out and about, whether it's, on Rush Street or downtown. And now Indianapolis is a great city, as we know. We've been there a million times for Big Ten tournaments and now this, but it is a different environment and vibe in there, and the old banquet, would always the luncheon, kind of held the whole thing hostage, because there were so many times when, especially when after Nebraska joined, then Rutgers and Maryland, that they'd have to split it, and you'd have the luncheon in the middle, and then sometimes, oh my gosh, the team I'm covering is going at 4:00 in the afternoon, and you have to wait for that stupid luncheon to get over with. But COVID killed it. New commissioner kind of killed it. And the coaches absolutely love this because they can get in and get out. Yeah. And so I've had a lot of conversations about them with that. But either way, it's it's good to have this time with these athletes. And, I saw our podium time has been cut down a little bit with them on the side, but overall it's always a good kickoff to the season. You kind of feel like, okay, football season is upon us.
Yeah, it's bittersweet for me because football season is my favorite time of year. It's a favorite thing to do, and this is the signal to the gateway to that. We're now entering when the Big Ten Media Day hits. That means it's there. So bittersweet in the sense that this is awesome. Football's around the corner. Not so great in the sense that the summer's now winding down. And for guys like us, this is, although you and I were just talking before we came on, the downtime or the time of leisure seems to get less every year as well because there's more demands with different varying things, social media and everything else. There's a lot to do now that maybe we didn't have to do years ago. And again, it's not a complaint. It's just that's the way it is now. But so for me, it's a bittersweet time when the Big Ten Football Media Day hits because it means the good news is football's around the corner, which I'm in favor of. Bad news is that summer is going through the hourglass pretty quick.
Yeah, I always look at it like a boomerang where, first week or so of June, you just throw the boomerang out. 4th of July is like the pole, and then it flips around and it smacks you in the face at Big Ten Media Day. So here we are. But, it is bittersweet, as you said, because we look forward to this all year. We talk football all year long. Football has become, it's always been the biggest and most important sport, but now it's even more so. It's a 24/7 sport, 365, whether you're dealing with NFL draft or you're dealing with the transfer portal, recruiting, everything, spring football, it's all football all the time. So now that you get to that tangible point, which is, okay, the season's here, who is on the roster, who's going to be available, and then the schedule's out there and the times are out there, then now you can start really focusing in on that. And I think everybody kind of likes that.
Let me talk for a quick moment about one of our great sponsors, Affinity Plus. It's your local credit union proudly serving Minnesota since 1930. As a current Gopher student or a proud Gopher alum, either way, you're eligible to join a financial that wants to build a meaningful banking relationship and put you first. Meet with a local employee at any of their branches statewide. There's one right off campus, in fact, in Minneapolis. You can learn more or find other ways to connect. Here's the webpage, affinityplus.org/go Gophers. That's affinityplus.org/go Gophers. Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, federally insured by NCUA, and a proud sponsor of Gopher Athletics. Generally, what are maybe 3 or 4 storylines that you think will be dominating the headlines next week when we're all in the state of Indiana?
I think you got to start with Northwestern now. What a surprise! Tragic in so many different ways to see the level of hazing that went on, and then to see Pat Fitzgerald, a person that I think a lot of us had high regard for as a coach, as a person, to be involved in that and then have his job, to be fired. That was a real surprise because Pat Fitzgerald is the epitome of Northwestern athletics. I mean, he is the first person you think of when you think of Northwestern, not only football, but, to be so embedded in that culture. I think that is going to be the topic number one when it comes to the teams. And the crazy part is, I don't think it's fair that the athletes have to answer for this because this is different than some of the other wild scenarios. I think back to the Sandusky stuff with Penn State players 10 years ago or a little over 10 years ago. But that they weren't really involved in that. This one, they are involved. It just happened to their coach. And we don't know if maybe they were part of it or maybe they were victims of it. And I also don't think – I would hate to be the PR rep for Northwestern telling everybody, hey, we're just going to talk football here, because that's disingenuous to the job that people are there to do. And nobody really wants to talk about Northwestern football anyway. I mean, they're 1-11 last year. Yeah. I hate to say it, but then I don't expect them to be much better. So I think that is going to be the one that kind of dominates the first day in particular. I think when you start to look more about the field, Wisconsin's the most interesting story to me because they had what I thought was a radical change for them. That was a shocking fire for Paul Chryst, and maybe I'm just conditioned to it because I cover Iowa. That I look at those two teams as like, nothing big ever happens
Yeah,
to
you're
them.
right.
They're always the same. So to make that change, to have Luke Fickell to have enter the portal and grab as many different types of players and to go through this different kind of offense, I think that's really something that's I'm really anxious to see how that transpires, because it could either take them from the level of being a good program to a very, very good program, or it could backfire completely, and then they've kind of been somewhat mediocre the last few years to fall further down that chute. But they could also they're just going to be very interesting, I think, if nothing else. I look at the other side. This is the first time in probably 2 decades where Michigan is clearly the hunted team and Ohio State is clearly the team chasing after it. It's always been the other way around. So I know that is going to be a major talking point, along with Penn State being the team that I think they might be a year away, but they've got a lot of talent and they could be very good. And then who's kind of there's going to be a team, I don't know if a dark horse is the right term, but somebody's going to kind of come up and be a competitive team in the West. Is it going to be Iowa, which, was a terrific defensive team, very pedestrian to be kind on offense, and but they've made a lot of changes there. Are they going to be that team? Nebraska's undergoing some major changes, but every year we say the same thing. When are they going to be good? Are they going to be good this year? Will Minnesota be able to replace? Tanner Morgan's older than PJ, I think, at this point. But are you going to replace Tanner? And how's Callie McManus going to take that role? I thought he showed some promise last year, and of course Mo Ibrahim is as good of a running back as I've seen in a long time in the Big Ten, and Purdue with the changes there, and Illinois with can they keep it up? I mean, there's 6 new quarterbacks in the West who are from the transfer portal. That's really interesting to me. So I think overall there's a lot of storylines, but Northwestern's probably going to dominate it, at least early, and then a new commissioner as well.
Right.
So some of those topics will be coming to the forefront, I would say, on the first day.
Yeah, those are exactly the ones that I was looking at as well, in terms of just what, where will the story, because there's always storylines ahead of time. You can always tell too when the mass group is together and then the coaches speak, who's writing features for what, because the same questions will come for each, and I always get a kick out of it, because then I almost get a precursor to it. Then I'll go read the content to see how the writer might have put something together based on the answers I heard or and they asked. So I think I enjoy, just as a media guy, the process of how, particularly the writers, how you guys go about crafting your stories each media day. Let's dive into the West, of course, because that here with the Go Gopher podcast, the Gophers in the West, and kind of take a deeper dive. You gave us a nice thumbnail Cliff Notes version there of this league or this division. Final year, first of all, let's talk about that for a minute, because it'll be the divisions are gone, at least for the short term. We'll see if there's further expansion over the next decade, and if that's the case, you would have to believe that somehow a pod system or a divisional system would go into play. I would think if you're getting more than 16 teams, even at 16, I find it a little interesting that you're just going to take the top 2 when every team's going to play barely over half the available opponents, right? Because there's 16 teams, you can't play yourself, so 15. You play 9. There's 6 teams every year you're not playing. It makes it interesting, but. I think that's one of the storylines too, right? It's the last year of the West, and we've been hearing forever the East people complaining, particularly Penn State. That was that they're one of the big pushers for this. No divisions. They feel like they get the short end every year with Ohio State and Michigan, while good old Wisconsin and Iowa get to cruise, as they say, into the championship game because they play in a weaker West. I think there's some truth to that, although the East is strong simply for the 2 schools, right? Michigan, Ohio State. If you flip those and put those in the West, we'd be talking about a similar situation. You'd have Rutgers and Maryland and some others who haven't been great over the years. Michigan State's been up and down, and they've been in the playoffs and they've been in the cellar in the last decade or so, 8 or 9 years. So anyway, last year of the West, what's your general impression as to how would you handicap the race?
I think it's pretty wide open right now. And I think it's because of all the changes that's been going on. And as you said, with the East-West divide, I think there's been some probably growing disparity over the last few years that we've seen, and certainly happens in Indianapolis at the championship game level. And I think that a lot of that's because of Michigan becoming a better team, better program, the program it should be, frankly. And that's where you're seeing really the disparity. But otherwise, it was like Ohio State and everybody else, because the crossover records are 90-78 in regular season play, but the East leading. But there's let's see, Minnesota is 11-13 against East teams. Iowa's 15-9. So there's been some real competitive ones. I would say Ohio State at 21-2 has been the king.
Well, Ohio State, since Urban Meyer took over, Ohio State's lost in 11 years 6 Big Ten games or something. I think. Ryan Day has two regular season losses in, is he 4 or 5 years? But 2 losses. That's it.
And they're to the worst team you could lose to if you're an Ohio State fan. Now people are like, is he on the hot seat? That just shows you what happens at places like that. I would say when you start with the West, I would imagine that Wisconsin is probably going to be the favorite, and it's almost at a default at this point because they weren't very good last year. Mm-hmm. I saw them up close. Iowa won, Minnesota beat them. Illinois crushed them. They were not a real good team last year. They had some good pieces. They've lost some good pieces too. So it's kind of funny to me. I think that's just a natural Wisconsin. They got Luke Fickell. There's some good coaches in the West. When you start to look at who else has been national coaches of the year, Ferentz has, Matt Rule has been Big 12 Coach of the Year. PJ has had his share of, I think, Coach of the Year in the Big 10 2019. So there's been some, Bielema has been up there. So for him to walk in and people to kind of say, okay, Wisconsin is automatically the favorite, I think is shallow, should I say? I look at, Tanner Mordecai. He was 33-10 at SMU, really good quarterback, but this is a completely different league. It's night and day. And the difference between 110 and then you're going to be playing in November in places like, whether it's Madison or Minneapolis or Iowa City or, Evanston or whatever, you're going to be playing in some really cold environments. And how is that spread offense going to handle it? I'm skeptical. I think they can, but to some extent, but they've also got a really good running back in Braylon Allen. And at some point they're probably it's going to look, and they're going to talk like it's a spread, but they're going to run like it's old Wisconsin. Yeah. So I think that's going to be the thing. Losing Herbig and Keanu Benton, those are big losses. They were really good players. They do have Ohio State and Iowa at home. They go to Minneapolis. I think that's going to be those are going to be the 3 pivotal games for them. So I'm not putting them as the favorite in the West. I'm putting them as, let's just see how they are in mid-season, when they, probably mid to late October before I say, they're a team that's going to be in contention, or they're a team that's, they got some work to do. Iowa is fascinating to me because, they had one of the best defenses in the country last year, no question, and the worst offense statistically over the last 25, at least in the Big Ten, and probably going back farther than that because they don't want to. But untypical of Iowa, if that's a word, they did hit the portal really hard. And that's unusual for Iowa. They traditionally just kind of keep things the way they are, boring, stale old Iowa. But they went and got a new quarterback in Cade McNamara, who beat them in the 2021 championship game. They went and got 2 new receivers. One was the Big South receiver, freshman of the year in Seth Anderson. The other one, Caleb Brown, was a 4-star, went to Ohio State, saw the depth chart and said, I want to play. So he's at Iowa. They got a couple new offensive linemen, a new tight end, and Eric All, who's considered an All-American capable tight end. And on defense, they lose Jack Campbell, who's irreplaceable in so many ways, but they got a pretty good replacement, Mick Jackson, who was a 2-time second-team All-ACC linebacker from Virginia, and he was going to go to Oklahoma or Iowa and picked Iowa. So they've got and along with the best special teams unit in the country, they've got a really good defense returning, really good special teams, and an offense that I think they could probably get more out of. Now, I'm not going to say they're going to be good. Maybe they'll at best be average, but average is a lot better than what they were last year. So,
and will they average 25 points, which is literally $1 million question, right?
It sure is. It is to one person there, and Brian Ferentz. And here's what's strange, Mike. In 2020, they averaged 32 points a game, and they were second in the Big Ten. Now last 2 years they haven't been anywhere near that, and that's been a problem. But I think they'll be okay there. They're big games to me. At Penn State is going to be tough for them. At Wisconsin, that's going to be a major game, and then playing Minnesota at home the week after playing Wisconsin. I think those are really big time. I mean, if they can get through that unscathed or be in contention, their final month is Northwestern at Wrigley, Rutgers at home, Illinois at home could be difficult, and then going to Nebraska. And, but I think they've got a really good chance. I would probably put them as the favorite because last year, if they had any kind of an offense whatsoever, they would be.
Yeah.
And then you look at the other teams, the school you cover, in Minnesota. Chris Ottman-Bell, 7th year now with the Gophers.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's crazy. But, you got him and Brevin Spanford. I think they're two of the better players of their position group. As I mentioned earlier, Callie McManus, I think he could be a really good quarterback. I saw flashes of that. Can he take the next step in a division where there's a lot of new quarterbacks? Can Sean Tyler from Western Michigan step in for Mo Ibrahim? Minnesota's had some good running backs. Bucky Irving a few years ago, and it's transferred out, and another one now at Penn State. But they've lost some. John Michael Schmidt's one of the best centers in the country. Can you replace him? There's lose quite a bit on the front seven on defense, and then there's just a really tough schedule. When you're already playing Iowa and Wisconsin and will every day through eternity, and then Michigan and Ohio State, that's going to be tough to win the West with those, because you look at those games and you think, man, it's probably 2 losses. Yep. And then you got to be perfect everywhere else, and that's not easy either. Nebraska, starting over every year. Mike, every year since they joined the league, we've said, when's Nebraska going to be good? When are they going to be Nebraska again? And every year, Scott Frost comes. Okay, now they're back. Well, they're backing up is what they're doing.
No question.
Yeah, so they've got a lot of new players. Matt Rule is an accomplished coach, but I kind of want to see it before I start, take an investment in that. Illinois, I thought, had an outstanding defense last year. One of the best in the country. Lost a lot of pieces on that secondary to the NFL. They have a new quarterback. They lost Chase Brown. But they also have some really big pieces on defensive line that I think they're going to be. Their defensive tackle combination of Newton and I'm blanking on the other one. They're good. That's going to be the best probably in the Big Ten. Brett Bielema, we know what he's all about. I expect them from now on to be a competitive program.
Yeah, tough out, right? You're
know what you're going to get. You might beat them, but you're going to feel them, and they're going to be a team that's probably going to win at least half their games every year. Purdue, taking Ryan Walters, the pretty good defensive coordinator. I don't know what to expect, because Jeff Brom had such a different. Everybody else zigged and he zagged in the West, and it worked for them. And they lost a lot of pieces in the portal, which is what happens there. Hudson Card coming from Texas, how will he fit in? They've got a very tough stretch of games, and losing Aiden O'Connell and Charlie Jones, and it's going to be an interesting year. And there, I'm probably not as bullish on them as I maybe was last year. And then finally, Northwestern, I think it's going to be tough for them to win more than a game.
Yeah.
I just know that they can do very much. They weren't very good last year, and losing the players that they did, and then of course the coaching situation, it's going to be awfully difficult.
Yeah, the turmoil just they may take a step back. It'll be interesting to see what they do with that coaching search. I think that any Big Ten job is going to be attractive. We'll see where with the facility now that they have, the right guy could probably come in there and figure things out. But I'm seeing a step back for them. I love the breakdown. I'm in agreement with almost all of what you said. I think if I'm not on the preseason prognostication media poll, but if I were, I think I would have Iowa as the favorite, and then I think after that, it's that there's a whole mix of teams, and part of it is the schedule. I think it's a mash of teams that can beat each other. Like I don't think there'd be a big double-digit favorite amongst that top 3 or 4 group, And I'll include Illinois in with Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa maybe is the top 4. I'm like you. I gotta, I lived in Missouri for 6 years, so they're gonna have to show me something, Nebraska, before I'm gonna put them in. I'm in total agreement with you on Wisconsin. I just think it's premature to say, well, they have Luke Fickell, so it's going to work. There are a lot of good coaches who had a lot of success, including even Fleck. Fleck was undefeated as a Power 5 coach, and it took him that first year, and watching it up close and personal, when you have a complete change of culture, that was the thing that struck me the most that first year with PJ, where they struggled. The middle of that year was really hard. They didn't have a quarterback that was real efficient. That hurt as well. Wisconsin, it looks like, will have a quarterback that can play, but I think when you're totally changing everything, I think that people are underestimating the impact that'll have. So I don't see them taking the step yet. It doesn't mean in a year or 2 or 3 that Wisconsin won't be in the playoffs. I don't know, but I don't think 2023 will be their year. We shall see. But to me, the schedule is the biggest thing. When you got a mosh pit of teams that all can beat each other on a given day, okay, as you said, Minnesota, they play Ohio State and Michigan. Iowa plays neither. That, to me, is a 2-game gap that somehow Minnesota's going to have to make up if they want to win the West. And the only way they can do that is to win in Iowa City, and they haven't done that since 1999. That I can tell you this, the Gophers will be fired up to play in Iowa City in October, but that doesn't guarantee anything, obviously. So all of a sudden you got a 2-game gap there. Minnesota could not take advantage last year of the soft schedule, so it's not a complaint from the Minnesota side. Oh, gosh, you got Michigan and Ohio State. Well, they didn't have them last year. They were in the driver's seat heading into the month of October after that blowout win at Michigan State and just couldn't take advantage. Purdue did, right? They did not play Ohio State or Michigan last year. And still needed to back in on the last weekend of the season because Iowa couldn't hold serve at home against Nebraska. So Purdue somehow maybe is the 4th best team in the division, I think, if you really polled football minds about it, got into the Big Ten championship game based on schedule. This year, Iowa has that benefiting schedule, and we'll see if they can take it. Even Wisconsin, outside of at home against Ohio State, which will be tough, it's fairly favorable. And then you look on the total flip side, Purdue has Ohio State and Michigan, Scott, and then you look, they have Fresno State as a non-conference game. That's a losable game for a first-year head coach at home. And then they've got at Virginia Tech, and I know the Hokies haven't been what they were with Beamer, but I'm telling you, you just go into that place as a Big Ten team. That's no picnic. And they have Syracuse at home. The Gophers saw Syracuse in the bowl game last year. They were okay. And so you talk about 2 Power 5s in the non-conference, and then one of the better group of 5s who won 10, and Michigan, Ohio State, and they're, as you mentioned, at Minnesota. I think they're at Iowa, right? So Purdue could find some tough sledding, I think, as the defending champ in this division.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they go 3-9 this year.
Right.
Something like that. I mean, that is a really brutal schedule, and I think that's something that can, it affects you. I mean, Fresno State at home, as you said, that's traditionally one of the better group of 5 teams. They were pretty good last year, and you go from there to to Virginia Tech, and they're kind of in the same boat in some ways, and they've been down, but Syracuse, they lost that game last year, and they were really close. I mean, you think about some of the bounces of the ball last year, and it really affected Minnesota probably more than anybody else. I mean, the Purdue game, what was it, the ball that bounced off the receivers, hands, and
that's
them.
The biggest thing about that game is they chose. I shouldn't say they chose. They were forced to sit Ibrahim. He was dressed. He was in pregame warmups. He went through the drills, and they said, "We're going to hold him out." He wasn't quite ready, and then their offense had been, I think they punted like 4 times in the first 5 weeks or whatever it was, and then for whatever reason that started a string where they just had 3 or 4 weeks in a row where the offense went back to kind of versions of the previous couple of years. So you're right. I think the Gophers are gonna, and that's going to be the biggest lost opportunity. Well, obviously now that the West is over after this year, but that one with no Michigan or Ohio State on the schedule, you were in the driver's seat, stubbed your toe at home to Purdue in a game that was there for the taking, and then had Iowa beat, basically. Yeah. And then Ibrahim, who's fumbled like 3 times in 800-plus carries, Jack Campbell pokes it out at the goal line. I think at that point Iowa was something like a 75% chance to win on whatever the probability chart is, basically wind the clock, kick the field goal, call it a day. And Iowa, as Iowa's defense has done now for numerous years, ends it with a couple of they forced a turnover. Campbell forces a fumble. Campbell gets the interception, and even in that case, it looks like he maybe didn't step out of bounds. Minnesota's probably better off if he scores that, because you have more time. Iowa then melts the clock, has the game-winning field goal. So anyway, Minnesota had some bad bounces. You mentioned Altman Bell missed the whole year, but everyone has to deal with stuff, and I think the Gophers will be kicking themselves for a long time that they had a chance and couldn't capitalize.
Yeah, I agree. And conversely, it for the most part worked out for Iowa, which was kind of like a one-armed guy in a heavyweight boxing match most of the year. But you talk about a bounce of the ball that didn't go for him was Illinois. They lose 9-6 in a game that nobody except football crazy people like me who like caveman football can appreciate. But Riley Moss picks up a fumble, runs at 82 yards for seemingly the game-winning touchdown, and on replay it had to be replayed like a million times for 5 minutes, and looked like the running back's knee was just down.
I thought that was a tough one to overturn.
Yeah. So, and then it becomes, that, I mean, and so, the West, I think the West will be comparable to that. I think Iowa is, for lack of a better term, Iowa. You know what you're going to get. They're going to be pretty good. They're going to be better on offense. You know what you got to do to beat them. And I know it's got to be killing PJ because they've been close. It's been close several years now. It's not just been a fluke. Last year they had Iowa beat, no question. A couple of years ago where the games were, it was 27-22 and they had a chance on a Hail Mary at the end of the game. And then in 19 when Minnesota was undefeated. And so there was a lot there where Minnesota was just on the cusp. And one of these years they're going to break through, but they haven't won it in Iowa City since '99. And that's kind of the marquee game in Iowa City this year. So as you mentioned, schedule plays a huge role, and they do play at Penn State. So that's not going to be easy for Iowa.
Yeah.
That's, one of the big three, but I think Michigan and Ohio State appear to be the top 2 teams in the league.
Yeah. And that's for Iowa, right? The toughest 2, I guess, on paper is at Penn State, at Wisconsin. Are they at Wisconsin this year, I think? Yeah, they're at Wisconsin. So on paper, and then again, for Minnesota to have any shot, they've got to win in Iowa City because they're already kind of in a gap there schedule-wise, and that's where it lays. And I oftentimes there's kind of a trendy pick, right? In the West. It's always Wisconsin or Iowa, and then who's the trendy pick? Minnesota's been that for a while. Purdue was that last year based on schedule. I remember being in Indianapolis saying, look, do not sleep on Purdue. They've got, the best quarterback returning, and they have a schedule that's favorable. As it turned out, I don't think they were, frankly, as good as I thought they'd be, but in this jumbled up, that West race was something. Minnesota was the leader in the clubhouse heading into September. They were looking great. They stubbed their toe, and then Illinois takes over, right? Now it's like, holy cow, Bielema, this guy can do it, and then they lose at home to Michigan State, and how does that happen? And all of a sudden, they probably had Michigan close to beat. I mean, there were some some weird, funky stuff happening late in that game and lose that. And all of a sudden, then Iowa's in the driver's seat, and you're like, oh, well, all they have to do is beat this Nebraska team with an interim coach who's no good at home, and they don't. And all of a sudden, Purdue's Jeff Brahma's like, how the hell did I end up in Indianapolis? But here I am, you know? So that was a crazy race. I don't know if there's a trendy pick, although, if Illinois wins it, I wouldn't be knocked off my bar stool. I mean, as you mentioned, they've got Newton and others, and Bielema is, going to make it hard for people to win. He knows, look, I think he's proven he knows what he's doing. So it should be a fun race.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are probably three teams that if they win, you're not really surprised. That's Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And an easiness of the schedule based on winning percentage, Iowa's 1, Wisconsin's 2, and Illinois is 3. So that makes sense. And now Minnesota, what would surprise me is basically because Michigan and Ohio State.
Yep.
They would probably they'd have to split with those two and then have one loss that won't affect them, or they'll have to win everything, go 7-2, and that's really difficult to do, and so that would surprise me. Nebraska would, simply because they just haven't proven anything yet, and then Purdue, I thought they just lost too much. They're starting over. That's with Jeff Brom, if he was there, I would give him a puncher's chance. And then Northwestern would be, I wouldn't even predict it. I would give them 0% chance of winning the West.
Yeah, that would be the all-time division upset of all time in the short time that the Big Ten's had divisions. All right, couple of quick things, Scott. I've already kept you over what I said I would, but you always offer compelling content. We joked at the start of this podcast about the summer's getting away from us, and there's not as much leisure time as we would like. Some of that for you is self-induced because you chose to take on the 3-part series, which if people haven't started to read it on The Athletic, they should, and if they haven't subscribed, they should do that as well. Tell us about this look at Big Ten history and kind of how it ties with TV and money and all of that stuff.
Yeah, we have a multi-part series at The Athletic on realignment and how it's impacted college sports. And I talked to Jim Delaney for, 2.5, 3 hours off and on, just to kind of go through what realignment was like when he was commissioner. And he said he's willing to open it all up, basically, from when he became commissioner through his retirement, and the reasonings and the factors. And, and one story that's coming out on Monday is about Penn State and how contentious that was. That was really surprising. He was very candid about it, and then I looked more and more into it, and it was a 7-3 outcome, and it needed 7 votes, and it flipped late on Northwestern because Northwestern was concerned that they would admit Penn State and boot Northwestern, because Northwestern at that point was, as we remember in the 80s, was really a bad program, and so he was really strong with that. He talked about the factors of why realignment and expansion have existed, and he pointed it all the way back to 2 main reasons. One was the Big East not picking up Penn State, and so that enabled the Big Ten to do it. And then everybody else from there kind of said, well, we need to start making changes. And Florida State, Miami entered leagues and what have you. And then he said the other, and this is probably the biggest reason of all, was the Supreme Court decision in 1984 that took away NCAA control of television and allowed conferences and individual schools to be a part of that. And so then ratings became more important, and how much each network is going to pay each school or each conference, and then who's in your conference matters, and their viewership, and so that's what really sent it spiraling, I guess, in the 1990s. And he was very candid about Notre Dame and what the thoughts were there, that they very much wanted Notre Dame, and even after they publicly turned them down, they still had conversations. And then the realignment or the expansion that brought Nebraska and the factors there, and then Maryland and Rutgers, which I will have a story about Rutgers later on. I think that's really fascinating with Rutgers in particular, because they've received a lot of scrutiny for that move, and probably rightly so. I mean, and I know there's some people at Rutgers who were saying, well, now that we're going to eliminate divisions, we'll have a better chance. Well, their losing percentage against Western teams is worse than Eastern teams. Yeah. And I think that's one thing that if you get people who follow the West Division bristle, it's like, okay, you've got Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, but Maryland, Rutgers, Indiana, they're not exactly,
no question,
lighting the world on fire. And in some cases, those are 3 easy wins for teams. Michigan State kind of bouncing back and forth. So, getting back to the realignment, Delaney was honest. He talked about why they went after Maryland and Rutgers. And really, he said, we were happy at 12. Then the ACC went after and got Pittsburgh and Syracuse, and went and got Notre Dame for all sports but football, but then added Notre Dame for football. And everybody was in multiple regions. We were in
Louisville.
One.
They got Louisville too, the ACC.
Yeah. After Maryland got swiped, so they were, and then they sought out Penn State after the Sandusky situation. So they felt like they needed to be in a different area. And he's like, look, we added 3% to geography and 18% to our population by simply going to the most lucrative corridor in the world from, Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia through Southern Connecticut. And so it was a money move, no question. And I think competitively, we all go, man, when you see Minnesota can't play the Jug every year, but because you got to play Maryland every year, that's right. What affects people.
No doubt. And so I called it a 3-part series. I've seen 3 parts, so it sounds like it's more than 3 parts. So maybe I shortchanged you there. How many parts is it?
Well, our entire series of The Athletic is about 25 stories.
Wow, great. Yeah.
Mine with Delaney was, we went with 3. And then I wrote a story about rivalries and some of those that have been off and on. And then we've got 2 more coming, Penn State and Rutgers. So they'll be on the next 2 Mondays.
Last one for you in relation to what you just said, further expansion now. USC, UCLA will start next year, which I can't wait for basketball in February to go out to California. That's, to me, the biggest highlight of it all. Gophers do play in the Rose Bowl against UCLA in 2024, and, of course, people can make all the jokes they want. That's the only way the Gophers can get in there. And now, actually, with the divisions going away, and this year, unless you're in the playoffs, you're not going to play in the Rose Bowl out of the Big Ten. I'm like, that is the Gophers' luck. They'd finally run the table. They'd end up somehow into the Rose Bowl on most years, but we'll end up playing in the Peach Bowl in Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium or something. That would be the way the Gophers' sports luck goes over the years. That would be somewhat. Anyway, UCLA USC gets added in 24 by 2030, and I know I saw Nicole Auerbach, your colleague, has done a little bit of a predictive story as well. What is Scott Dochterman's prediction in 2030? What is the member list, and who do you think will be added? Let's say that's 7 years from now.
Wow, that's really fascinating, because I couldn't tell you what's going to happen the next month based on this Pac-12, Big 12 situation. Anything can happen. I think for 5 years, we'll start there. I think you'll see status quo with the Big Ten. I don't see any kind of movement. I know last year the commissioner, Kevin Warren, was interested in adding more of the Pac-12 teams, and I know the presidents were adamantly against it. I think almost unanimously, because they see the same factors we all do. Travel. I mean, it's one thing to go play a football game in Eugene, Oregon once. It's another thing to go out there and play volleyball and soccer and everything else. So I would still think that 7 years, man, I think there's going to be a battle. I think there's going to be it'll be the time when the SEC and the Big Ten battle legitimately over a school. And I think it'll be over North Carolina.
That's the jewel on the East, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Growing area, fan base, passionate fan base. I think I could see the Big Ten wanting Virginia and North Carolina. I could see the SEC wanting the same thing, because that's new territory for them. They're headquartered in Charlotte, the SEC network. So I think that would be the one, but the Western teams, I think it's really interesting. Like, I know talking to a few people kind of off record last year, because there was a lot of speculation about Cal and Stanford and people wanting to be involved in them and with their high academic profile. But they're like, we interact with them already in the AAU. Mm-hmm. We don't need to have a conference umbrella just to interact with them. And I thought that was really fascinating. So overall, I would think that I think 16 until we get to 2030. Mm-hmm. And then at 2030, all bets are off. It could go different. But Jim Delaney had a really interesting discussion. I gave it to Nicole. The quote was, at what point do you go from being a conference to an association of schools? And then you have market power. And then you start having the Department of Justice and everybody looking into you.
Yeah.
And 18, he thinks might be too many for that. So
no kidding. Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, it's going to be their catnip though.
They
getting
are.
North Carolina. It's like,
yeah, North
right.
Carolina for the East. And then dark horses, and again, that academic fit or not population fit, Georgia Tech academically, and they're the gateway to the South in Atlanta. Is the Big Ten, I mean, if I'm the Big Ten, I got to take a hard look there to try to get TV money out of that huge population base. Miami gets you into Florida, although there's not statewide interest there. To me, Notre Dame is that's the domino, I think, for the Big Ten that has to fall at some point before they do other stuff, and maybe that's never going to happen. The way the new rules are written with college football playoffs, if I'm Notre Dame, I'm tempted to join a conference. One, for money, we'll see what their TV deal is, but two, I'll never get a bye. And if my sole purpose is existing not just as a football program but an athletic department, their sole purpose is to win a national football title, it is harder if you have to play an extra game. Even if it's on your home campus, those are hard games. You're playing a top 12 team most likely. To get a bye is a big advantage. And as the rules are written currently, they'll never get a bye, right? They'll always have to play that first-round game, sometimes on the road. So if my sole purpose is to win a national football title, to me I think that's an underrated. Maybe I'm the only guy that thinks that, and the reason others haven't talked about it is because maybe it's not as important as I think. But to me, if I'm the AD, I'm like, damn, I'm never going to get to host or never going to get a bye. I might get to host, but I don't get a bye. That's a big deal. Like, you win the Big Ten, you don't have to play that first-round game.
Right. I could see that being a factor when it happens, for sure. One thing I know Notre Dame and even some of the other schools like about that is they can take this to their season ticket holders and say, you have the opportunity to have one more game in what could be one of the biggest games in school, in school history on your campus. I mean, I always say if Iowa's playing in the playoff and they're hosting it at Kinnick Stadium, it's the biggest game in Kinnick Stadium history.
No question. That's true.
And I think that's pretty much on par for most of the schools. And so I think once the playoff gets going and the top four teams, in Ohio State and Alabama, whatever, start seeing, man, they get to have extra games on their campus and we don't. I think that's when the bowl part of it gets eliminated for the first round, because I can't imagine what it's going to be like for people who have to pay to travel to three straight destinations. Yeah. Cotton Bowl, Phoenix, and LA. That's a lot of money for fans and especially students. I mean, how are they going to get that kind of money?
No doubt.
So I think that's going to be something that'll be factored in eventually. Notre Dame, it's going to come down to what they get from NBC.
No doubt.
If they get a good contract, they've got enough donors that say, we will stay with you if you are independent and bolt if you aren't, that they feel like they can compensate even if the Big Ten is making $65 million a year and they're at 50, they're okay. But if they're at 30, they're not.
The guy trying to negotiate that deal for NBC on that side of it is now the new Notre Dame athletic director, by the way.
I know,
which is pretty interesting, right? He's a Notre Dame grad and was the head of NBC Sports, or at least the part that's negotiating. So he's got pretty intimate knowledge on both sides. It'll be pretty interesting to see where that negotiation goes. I also think, lastly here, Scott, I've said lastly about 10 minutes here, but UCLA and USC. So if they don't go west, if they leave Stanford, Oregon, Washington, whoever else might be a candidate out the Big Ten, can USC and UCLA survive staying in the Big Ten? Their closest road game will be Lincoln, Nebraska for an extended period of time for all sports and conference. I just find that hard to believe that those two schools would just say, yeah, we're gonna. I mean, we've done that. The Gophers have played Oregon State. They've played USC. That sucks. That's a terrible trip for football, and it's once. I can't imagine if you're, like you say, basketball. If you're the UC, if you're the head coach for the basketball program at either school, and your closest road game is Lincoln, Nebraska, everything those trips are going to suck for those guys.
They're going to have to get really inventive in how they structure some of these trips. And I've heard some of the discussions and where they're probably going, which make perfect sense. Like if the Gophers head west, then maybe it will be a combination of the men and women going and playing USC. Maybe it's a doubleheader, maybe it's separate sites or something on a Thursday, and then UCLA on a Saturday, something to that effect. So you're kind of bunching everybody, and you're saving on costs, and you're one, and then for them, conversely, flying to Detroit and playing Michigan and Michigan State, or Indianapolis and playing Purdue and Indiana. That's probably what they're going to have to do. I think it's going to be, football is survivable, not great, but survivable. They're going to have to make use of a 0 week, in my opinion. So maybe you can get that Rutgers UCLA game out on week 1 for either school. But the fact that everybody else only has to travel to California once a year, and they're going to have to travel 4 or 5 times to the Central or Eastern time zone is challenging for them. In the other sports, I think basketball at this point, go ahead and cut your games down from 20 to 18 or hell, even 16. I hate to say it, but because you're really asking for them to do a lot with a 20 game schedule. And, it's already tough enough with 20 for teams here. And so that way they can play more of their non-conference games against Fresno State or Cal or UNLV or something like that.
Yeah, the guy who got it the worst in all of this is the baseball coach for both schools and softball. Although I don't think USC has softball. Can you imagine your schedule? You're one of the best programs in the history of college baseball. USC, they've won College World Series before. Your schedule is included driving across town to play UCLA. I don't know, probably busing up to San Francisco to play Stanford and Cal, flying to Tucson, flying to Arizona State, warm weather. Now you're going to Minneapolis on April 28th to maybe play. I mean, maybe. Yeah. You might get 2 of the 3 games wiped out for sleet or snow. Then you're going to fly to Rutgers, 5,000 miles or whatever. I don't know how far. What's the East Coast to West Coast? 4,000, 5,000 miles, whatever it is. 3,000 miles. You fly that. And now you're sitting in New Jersey hoping on May 6th that the weather's okay to play. God, that guy's got to be looking for a different place to coach baseball, doesn't he?
No, I think you're right.
I mean,
some of the things that I've heard about are like, a lot of times everybody takes those spring break trips and stuff down south. Well, they might be taking spring break trips out to LA,
play tournaments,
play, have 6 teams out there playing all week, and playing 5 games each or something like that. Yeah. I think one in a couple other areas that they should take advantage of, they should have all along, like Milwaukee. There's no Wisconsin baseball team before the Brewers get there, in April or late March. Why not have more teams play in that stadium, State
Good call.
Or whatever, or American Family, I guess it is now, playing there. To me, I think that would be better. And that'd be better for them too. So if they were to say travel and spend all week in Milwaukee and play 3 or 4 games there, as opposed to trying to go to Iowa City or Minneapolis or, Champaign even, and, get to these places. And so I think this is it. Other than football, this is a football decision. It's going to be tough. And, maybe that's the next step, Mike. Maybe that's what we don't know, is that when everybody takes a step back and they see how crazy it is for UCLA and USC soccer to fly across the country, or track, and then they're playing baseball and softball in 35-degree weather, when in LA it's twice that.
Yeah.
That maybe the next realignment is we just do this for football. and everything else kind of fits in its own category. I don't think anybody would complain if USC and UCLA, okay, we'll play 4 games against Big Ten teams and we'll play the rest out here. I think that might be the next step, some sort of organization that way.
For sure. All right, very good, Scott. I've kept you way too long, but you always offer great stuff. How can people read your stuff? Let us know.
Yeah, go to The Athletic. Go and click on one of my stories. Now, granted, if you're talking Gophers fans, they're not going to click on a Hawkeye story, but maybe Alec Lewis with our Vikings coverage. But no, go to The Athletic and subscribe. I think we're $2 a month now. We cover college football, in the big picture better than everybody. And I hope to touch on some Gophers while I'm in Indianapolis myself.
Yeah, very good. Sounds good. Really cool series too with the conference expansion and your access to Jim Delaney. So people should read that as well. And obviously here locally, as you mentioned, Alec Lewis, as well as Michael Russo, John Krasinski with Wolves and Wild, and others as well. So we appreciate it, Scott. As always, we'll see you next week in Indianapolis.
All right. Thanks, Mike, for having me on.
Yep. Thank you. It's Scott Dochterman from The Athletic, episode number 79. I hope you enjoyed all the terrific Big Ten and Golden Gopher insight from The Athletic Scott Dochterman. If you don't read his stuff on a regular basis, you should start. He's plugged into the Big Ten and is always producing compelling content. My thanks to Scott for spending time with us here on the Go Gopher podcast, episode number 79. We're presented by Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're buying or selling a business, visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com today. We're also partnered with Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, a locally member-owned full-service financial invested in you. You can learn more at affinityplus.org/GoGophers, affinityplus.org/GoGophers. We're also sponsored by State Farm agent Tony Hoagland. Again, I'd invite you to listen to past podcasts, and right now, please be sure to click the subscribe button to the Go Gopher podcast. It's free to subscribe and free to listen at any time. And please share the link to the podcast with others so they can subscribe and listen as well. We'll talk again next week.